Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we're going to now turn to the fourth and final topic of something we should be praying about much more often. And to address this topic, I want to do something a little different, a little exercise, if you'll play along with me. I'm going to put over here on the screen a graphic, a group of things, and when I show that group of things, I want you to ask yourself two questions. The first question is, what do the things in that group have in common? Now, this isn't some psychological difficult this is a simple thing. So just when you look at that group, what do they have in common is the first question. The second question to ask yourself is, do I have a preference? Is there one of those out of that group that I prefer? So this should be easy. Just kind of play along if you would, and hopefully we can make a point out of this. So let me put the first group up. So there it is, and ask yourself the two questions. One, what do all of those things in that group have in common? You've probably got that already. Second question, do I have a preference of those? Okay, so you got that. So let's do this a couple more times. Let me take that one down and put up another group. So out of this group, what do they have in common? And do you have a preference? Give you just a couple seconds. Presumably this is simple. And now let's take that one down and put a third group up. And again, the same two questions. What do they have in common? Do you happen to have a favorite of the group? Okay, so that is the third group. Now I'm going to put a fourth group up. This group might be a little different, but the same two questions. So here's the fourth group. And the questions are, what do they have in common? Is there one of those that you prefer or would call your favorite? Okay, so thanks for playing with that little exercise. Now let's talk about that for a minute. Let's review. I'm going to put all four groups up here so you can just kind of see them together. The first group that we put up there were car manufacturers. And by the way, if you look at those and you say, I don't have a favorite, my favorite's not there, don't worry about that. That's not the point anyway. But you see, group one is car manufacturers. The second group we put up there was retail department stores. The third group was online entertainment streaming services. Now, I know some people are going to have a hard time choosing their favorite because they subscribe to all of them. I'm not one of those, but it's a big deal to some people. And then the fourth group that we put up there were religious organizations. That's what they had in common. And to be more specific, they were Christian organizations. So that was simple enough. Now we come to the next part of our exercise here. And as you look at all of those groups, all four of those, I want you to ask yourself another question about each group. And that question is, what is a second thing that each of those groups have in common? So you look at the car manufacturers. First thing is they're all car manufacturers. What's a second thing that they all have in common? And ask yourself that second question for each one of those groups. What is a second thing each group has in common? It may not be as obvious on this one. I'll give you a hint. And that hint is that the answer to that second thing each of those groups has in common is the same answer for all four groups. The second thing each group has in common is the same thing for all four. So what do you think it is? Have you figured that out? Let's talk about that for a minute. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Some of you have probably figured that out. Let me tell you what I believe. What I've concluded that each of those groups have in common as a second thing, and that is that within each of those groups, they compete for your time, your loyalty, and your dollars. They compete with one another. Even though within the group there's some things in common, they compete with one another. Okay. Now, that was step one of our little exercise, so please bear with me. We're going to now turn to step two. We're going to turn to the Bible for step two. Let's read John chapter 17, verses 20 through 23. I'll put it on the screen so you can read along. Jesus here is praying, and he has prayed for himself, he has prayed for his disciples, and as we see when we start this, he's now praying for us. He says, starting in verse 20 of chapter 17, I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word. So he says, I'm not praying just for these apostles, but the people who will believe in him because of their word. That's you and me, that have believed in Jesus because the word was passed down through the apostles. So he says, I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, even as we are one, I and them and you and me, that they may be perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you loved me. Now, let's put step 1, our little graphics, and step 2 together if we can. And talk about what this means when we put those two together. Remember from step 1, and this is how the world sees us. What I mean by that is that when we look at the chart of religious organizations, we saw that they may have been all religious organizations, but they compete with one another. And so when you think about that versus what Jesus prayed for in John 17, that we would be one, the question we ask ourselves is, how well are we doing to fulfill Jesus' prayer? That we would be one, and as he said in one part of that, perfectly one. I would conclude that the world, seeing the religious organizations today, that perhaps we're going in the opposite direction of what Jesus prayed for. Because what does the world see? I believe they see people who call themselves Christians that can't get along with one another. They put their sign up on the road and they talk about that other group, and there are people who claim that they are right and all those other people with a different sign in front of their church building are wrong. They haven't got it figured out like we have. I think the world sees people who market themselves to the world using the same approach as all the other businesses up and down the street. They say, come listen to our speaker. He's a great speaker. He's much better than those other preachers and speakers at those other places. And we have a program just for you, man. We've got what you need. And no matter what group you're in, we've got something for you. Just like the other business who say they've got something for us. And we want to keep our church buildings looking really nice and attractive to make sure that people feel comfortable and attracted to come in, just like the other businesses down the road. I believe what the world sees is one more business competing for their attention and their money when they look at this big picture of all these different religious Christian organizations competing for their time, attention, and dollars. But do they see God, and do they see God's love, and do they see God's Son who came to save us? And the question I would ask, going back to our little exercise, and do they see the unity that Jesus prayed for, the last thing he prayed for before he was arrested and tried and crucified? Do they see that unity, or do they see division and finger pointing? Do they see the unity that Jesus prayed for and why he prayed for it? You know, he says in that passage, so that the world will know that you sent me. Jesus wasn't just praying for unity for no reason. He made it clear in his prayer, Father, may they be one so that the world will know that you sent me. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we would say that that's probably not what they see when the world looks at us. They see a bunch of Christians that can't seem to get along with one another, and a group of people that have turned God's church into something that looks and operates just like all the businesses up and down the street. And yet Jesus prayed that we would be so perfectly one that would compel the world to know that God sent Jesus to this earth for them. I do not have the answer on how to take Jesus' prayer and make it real. I wish I had that answer, but I must honestly say I do not have the answer to how we take our current situation with all these different divisions and make us perfectly one. I don't have that. But I know who does. And I know that He wants us to pray and ask Him to give us that answer. And I know He wants us to pray and ask Him to guide us to be a part of that answer. And I know that if we don't sincerely pray for the unity, the same unity that Jesus prayed for, that we'll keep going down the road of the same competitive, finger-pointing path that we've been on for so long, dividing and separating and redividing and subdividing. And because of that, the world will likely not understand that God sent Jesus to the world to save them. He prayed, they may be one so that the world will see that God sent Him to the earth. I believe we need to turn to God and frequently and fervently pray that God will guide us to the unity that Jesus prayed for. If it was important enough for Jesus to pray for, then certainly we ought to be praying for it as well, getting on our knees, frequently praying that we as the Christians showing God to the world would show unity through our faith and our belief in Jesus Christ. We may not be able to agree on everything. There may be a lot of things that we can't agree on, but surely we could agree that we want to fulfill Jesus' prayer for unity. And if we want to fulfill that prayer, we need to be praying that God will help us do that. I hope you'll join me in praying for that unity. Again, I don't have the answer, but I know that God does, and He wants that. And Jesus asked Him for that, and let's ask God that we'll be able to fulfill Jesus' prayer for unity among the Christians, among the saints in this world, so that the world will know that God sent Jesus to this earth for them. In our next video, we're going to come back and we're going to try to connect some of the dots of the things we've talked about in these videos and put a bow on that, and hopefully be able to take away from that some things that we can do to improve our prayers and our prayer life and be more in tune and more lined up with what the Bible instructs us when it comes to prayer. I thank you for listening and thinking through these topics with me. We'll have one more video to wrap it all up. I hope to see you then.